we are going to be doing Good Lessons from Bad Guys. This book is written by Mike O'Neill, who worked years, a career at NASA, and then he has a master's degree in Bible, I believe, from Harding, and is a member of the church. So this is going to be a book that is written by somebody who is, I don't want to say one of us, but he is a member of the church. So that makes it a little better. Today we are going to be talking about Nabal. Everybody knows Nabal, and everybody knows what Nabal means, right? Fool. Well, we're going to see the fool in action today, and we will be camping out on 1 Samuel 25 when we get going, but I'd like to do a few introduction things about this, about Nabal. He is a very interesting character, but to put it in the proper setting, put what's about to happen in chapter 25, in the proper setting and context, David was fleeing another sort of crazy person, and that was Saul. Saul was chasing him around, so David and his men were in the wilderness trying to avoid Saul. And what they had done is done something good for a neighbor, this group had. At the time this was occurring, it was a festive time, and I can understand if you're a sheep herder, shearing the sheep is a festive time because it means the wool is about to be processed and we're about to have our income. So the neighbor, Nabal, you actually wasn't a neighbor as such, but Nabal had, as we're going to see here, 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, and they were shearing their sheep nearby where David was. Now we can also imagine two things. We've talked about sheep in the past. They're not the smartest animal on the planet. They can wander off and fall over the cliff or whatever, or during this time, they're perfect for stealing. So what David and his men did is provided a protective service for Nabal's sheep, and that's important as they were being sheared, and that's important to sort of set the stage for what's going on, how everybody came together at this point. And Nabal was considered rich, and we're going to look at that in just a second. But David did this without being asked. This was a voluntary thing. I know everybody in this room at many times during your lives have helped neighbors when they haven't asked for it. You know, the dog gets out and you take the dog back, things like that. Maybe three children and their parents, 3 children at that time, 5 and under, moved in next door to me, and I started seeing flying objects in my backyard. They would play out there, and I would just take it over, take a handful of stuff over there, and put it in their little planter, and they thanked me for it, and that worked out real well. Plus, they used the driveway to ride their bicycles on, and that's good. One day I was coming out of the garage as the was coming up, and he's pedaling along, and looks up. There we had our little meeting. But the point of it is, we do things, and David did this for this neighbor, and he would be a neighbor. But Nabal did not know what had happened. Now let's look, the first thing we're going to do, and then we'll get into chapter 25 of Samuel. First thing we're going to do, and this is going to be kind of rapid fire, but we're going to look at Proverbs. The Proverbs on fools. Proverbs 1:7, and we all know this by heart. The fear of the Lord is knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. One of the most basic characteristics of a fool is the self-centered nature of it. I'm always right. I don't need for you to correct me. So I don't need this wisdom. Doing wickedness, this is Proverbs 2:23. Doing wickedness, if I could pronounce it, it would come out better. Doing wickedness is like sport to a fool. How many of you have known people who do things, bad things, wicked things, stupid things, and it's almost like a sport? And then they wonder why things go wrong. It's like a sport. So is wisdom to a man of understanding. So wisdom is important to the other people who understand, not the fools. The fools know it all. The way, in Proverbs 12:15, the way of the fool is right in his own eyes. Okay? But a wise man is he who listens to counsel. And that is so important, isn't it? All of us have mentors, or we are mentors to others, but all of us have had that mentor relationship where we value people's counsel. But the fool does not, because he's always right in his own eyes. Proverbs 13:19, desire realized is sweet to the soul, but it is an abomination to fools to turn away from evil. They just can't do it. It's like being addicted. They're addicted to the evil. The wisdom of the sensible is to understand his way, but the foolishness of fools is deceit. Proverbs 14:8. And for those of you who were in the first service, you know that Dale's sermon focused on deceit and lying and the other's honesty. And then in Proverbs 14:16, a wise man is cautious and turns away from evil, but a fool is arrogant and careless. And we are going to see Nabal as a very, very arrogant person. Because if you know everything, it's hard for them to be humble when they're so great. Wasn't there a song like that? Yeah. Yes. So we can see that how profound that is. A fool is not does not delight in understanding, but only, and we love this. I know you've all met people like this. This is Proverbs 18:2. A fool does not delight in understanding, but only in revealing his own mind. We had a lady who was outside of a courtroom one day, and she was upset, and she was saying, if I could just give the judge a piece of my mind. And I was thinking, ma'am, I wouldn't give away that which you have very little of. Just hang on to what you got and don't give it away. But sometimes that's the way people are sometimes. And finally, and this is the most, I think the most important foolish thing. This is in Psalms now, 14:1, Psalms 14:1. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And when you think about that, all of the rest of the foolishness is clearly explained. I mean, clearly, you can see it. You can see why it's going to happen. All right, now what we had here with Nabal, we're going to get started with this as we gave the context there as we begin 1 Samuel 25. And we will go through the entire chapter, but obviously we're not going to go line by line necessarily, but idea by idea. The other part of the context here is Samuel. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him in his home in Ramah. And David moved down into the desert of either Paran or Maon, and we'll use Maon because in the next verse it comes up. But the point of this is the reason he moved down into this desert, the reason he was in the quote-unquote wilderness was to avoid Saul. And then we have a certain man there at verse 2 in Maon who had property there in Carmel, was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. Now, one of the interesting things about the introduction, the writer's introduction to Nabal, is not he was a man of God or that he was good or that he was wise. It is he was rich. He was rich. And this, as we're going to see in a few minutes, he probably got rich because of the way he treated people. And I don't think that's a profound statement. I think any of us could see that from what we're about to read. Now, his name was Nabal, which as we know means fool. I don't think, I, I don't know of any parent who would name a child, name their son Nabal. Here's the fool. Now, sometimes the children turn out to be the fool. And in LCU, we saw a few of those. And in Corps, we saw a few of those. But in the Army, we saw a few of those. So and they thought we were foolish too. But anyway, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman. Okay? And I noticed laughing, I think I may know what you're thinking. If she's so intelligent, why in the world is she with the fool? But apparently she was.
The guys marry up. I don't know how it works. Guys marry up.
Yeah. Well, no, we'll leave that right there. Because that is one of those situations where you get out of the hole by stop digging, not digging it deeper. So we'll just leave it at that. But you can see here, she's beautiful and intelligent. But now by contrast, her husband, as we read there, was surly. Now what is surly? Yeah, hey, fool, can't you listen to me?
Yeah.
Focus on me. What do you mean to shake your head that way? Surly can be harsh also. Oh, I'm not supposed to get too close. We're allowed to take our masks off. I can just imagine what it's like trying to teach with a mask on and trying to hear what they're saying. But anyway, and he was mean in his dealings. Another translation of that is evil in his dealings. We talked about fools from Proverbs and Psalm, particularly those in Proverbs. Evil is at the heart of what they do. Okay, then as we go on, he was a Calebite. Now we go to verse 4 there. While David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name." And we're going to talk about what David says and then Nabal's response. You all know this story. I mean, this is nothing new. But the point here is the reason he knew that they were shearing sheep is his men had provided protection for that process, for those procedures of shearing, and made sure that none of the sheep got away and nobody stole the sheep. And that's very important. But what we now have is David's instructions to the young men that he is about to send. He said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel, greet him in my name." Now, David's name was important, and people knew that. They knew who he was. "Say to him, long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours." Now, that is a very warm greeting. It is not, "Hey, Nabal, I'd like to talk to you." This was a very gracious way to greet him, showing him respect. And David is, of course, a man after God's own heart, so we're going to see a definite contrast here. Then, at verse 7 there, "Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time." And again, this was a festive time. It was not while the work was being done. I'm sure the shearing was very taxing for the workers, but as soon as it was over, then there was the festival sort of thing. And there's no specific Jewish festival, but there is a kind of like throwing a party after we've completed a very difficult case or whatever we happen to do. We then take some downtime. "When your shepherds were with us," probably more properly stated, when our shepherds were with you, providing your protection for the 3,000 sheep, "we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were in Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing." And he's not saying we didn't steal any of the sheep. He's saying because our sheep, why pluralize that? But the sheep, because we have, because that was not their intent. Their intent was protection. And this protection kept the sheep from wandering off and from thieves coming in. Because we know just through the history of the area at this time, just even the secular history, will show a lot of crime going on. There were bandits running throughout the region, and they would take whatever they could take. Ask your servants, and they will tell you. And that's kind of a prelude to what's coming up here in just a couple of minutes. Therefore, be favorable toward my men, since we have come at a festive time, as I indicated. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can for them. Now, what he is asking for here, he is not saying up front, if you pay us, we'll protect your sheep and keep them from running off or being stolen. What he is saying is, we have done that. Now, as a matter of gratitude, would you give us what he says here, whatever you can find for them? And these were provisions. David was on the run. He had a number of men. We're going to see there's probably about 600 total. We're going to see that they had needs. They had needs to eat and to drink and other things. So when David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then they waited. I like that. That's in there for a reason. Why? Mr. Self-centered is not going to react quickly. If somebody came to your door, a neighbor came to your door, our door, and asked for something, would you say, just shut the door and then make a decision? That's not the way it should have gone. But Nabal is a fool. And we can learn from him, this is not the way to act. And we know that. Everybody in this room would give to help people. Give whatever we can. Look how generous this congregation is as a congregation. Whatever the need. Whether it's sack day, whether it's dollar day, whatever, or we had a need. When I first got here, one of the things that really impressed me about this congregation, when I first arrived, just before Hurricane Katrina, and I had nothing to do with that. I came from the West. Katrina came from the East. But anyway, Hurricane Katrina, this congregation got together and raised, I don't remember how many thousands of dollars in relief aid. Just one night. They said, we got, just like when you pass your basket here. That's what was done. It was phenomenal. All right, but that's not Nabal. Nabal answered David's servants, and I love this. Who is David? Well, he knew full well who David was. And that's an insult, because David is going to be the king, and everybody knew it. Saul tried to prevent it, but everybody knew it. Who is this son of Jesse? Well, if he knew he was the son of Jesse, he knew who David was. There's none of this. Who's this David? I've never heard of him. He has. But he is ranting and raving. And this is not, I'm imagining, and I think correctly or inferring, that he doesn't say, well, who is this David? He's ranting and raving and stomping around like he usually does. We've all known people who do that. Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Now, a commentary on that phrase, it sounds kind of odd, but what was happening there is he was lumping David and his men with these servants who were fleeing their masters. So he is really putting David on a very, very low level, and an insulting low level at that. And then he goes on to say, and I love this, verse 11, why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where? All right? He's a jewel, isn't he? Besides being a fool, he's a Jew. David's men, I'm sure, they were probably dumbfounded by this, flabbergasted by this. You know, sir, we're not here to ask for the whole herd of sheep and goats and everything. We're just here to ask for a little help here. So they then turned around and went back. When they arrived, I love this is always good, they reported every word. Okay? And that gives us a lesson there. Watch what we say, because we will hear it later. How many of you have had children? You've said something in front of the children. Your parents or your wife's parents or husband's parents come to and the child repeats exactly what you said word for word. And it was embarrassing. Okay? That happened. So here we are. So what does David say to his men? Each of you strap on your sword. We're not strapping on swords because we're going to go pay a friendly visit to Mr. Nabal, are we? No, we're going there with the swords because this is a major insult. Now, David is going to do something that if he had carried it out, we all know this, carried it out would not have been really appropriate. But he has a little bit of a temper. And I can understand he's being insulted. What's the first thing when somebody insults us? What do we want to punch him in the nose, right? Sometimes. Other times you just say, I just consider the source and ignore it. You know, it's not worth it. Yeah, because you're like that lady outside the courtroom. Don't give away much of your mind because it ain't going to happen for very long. All right, anyway. So they did, and David strapped on his as well, about 400 men. Now he's taking 400 men. He means business here. Went up with David while 200 stayed with what supplies they had, or with less supplies. Now we switch again, we go back to Nabal's residence or his home. And this is pretty gutsy, what is about to occur. One of the servants, because servants in that day, for those of you who are Downton Abbey fans and all of that, the British servants of the day were treated very well by comparison to servants of this day. So a servant told Abigail, Nabal's wife, this is pretty good. David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Now this guy is a good reporter. He got it accurate. He doesn't varnish it. He doesn't say, well, he kind of said something maybe he shouldn't have said. He goes right for the jugular and said he insulted him. They did not mistreat us. And the whole time we were out there in the fields near them, nothing was missing. So David's people did not mistreat them, and yet, more importantly, they helped them because none of the sheep were missing. Mr. Rich guy, wealthy guy, didn't lose any of his sheep. Night and day, they were a wall around us the whole time we were herding our sheep near them. And again, the shearing part of it. Now, think it over. This is kind of gutsy, too. He's telling the Lord and Master's wife, now think this over. That's generally not the kind of language that we think servants would use in this time frame, but it is certainly something that needed to be said. Now think this over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. Hey, he knows. He has just insulted David. He knows this is not going to go well. David's not going to say, oh, well, let's see if we can go to the corner 7-Eleven and buy some supplies or whatever. It's not, the result is going to be, as he says, a disaster. And then he closes this out with, he is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. What did Proverbs say about the fool? He knows everything. He doesn't need any counsel. He doesn't need any help. Okay? So they've got, Nabal is a great example of a fool. And then Abigail, what did she do? She acted quickly. I think we can infer from that this wasn't the first time that Nabal had done something really seriously stupid. And it wasn't the first time that she had to do the cleanup on aisle 4 kind of deal. She had to go out and clean up after him. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, and by dressed sheep we mean they've been slaughtered and they're not dressed up like Santa Claus or something. And I just threw that in. It's kind of that time of year, frivolity there. Dressed sheep, 5 seahs, which would be about 60 pounds of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisin and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Nabal must have had a lot of donkeys too, because this just doesn't go on a couple of them and you lead them down there. This is a very large offering. Now, if Nabal had done this, we would not be studying. If that had been his order, and if he had taken it down there to David, we wouldn't be studying this as a good lessons from a bad guy, because he would have been a bad guy. But she steps in and basically is trying to defuse this situation. Then she told her servants, go on ahead, I will follow. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. Now, why do you think that was?
She knew he wouldn't let her do it.
Yeah, would not let her do it. Do you think there may have been some violence in that household? Where when she did or said something he didn't like, he didn't say, well, honey, I wish you wouldn't say that, or honey, I wish you wouldn't do that, because something like that. I'm inferring from, by the way, I was on the domestic violence team when I was in the DEP's office. So we saw a lot of this going on, where a wife tries to bail her husband out of a real mess that he's gotten himself into, and he doesn't like it. And then, as she came riding her donkey into a mountain, riding into a mountain ravine, there were David and his men descending toward her, and she met them. Now, why were they descending toward her? Because they were going to where she had come from. And they had a plan, and it wasn't a good one for the group there. So David had just said, it's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness, so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, or some translations, or David's enemies, be it ever so severely. By morning, I will leave alive one male. I leave alive one male of all those who belong to him. He's going to kill everybody but down to the one. So he is going to take revenge on this for the insult. And that's what it is. It's the insult. It's not the fact that he doesn't provide provisions for it. I mean, these can come from other places. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She knew who David was. Nabal didn't. Who's this David? Who's this son of Jesse? He didn't know him. She knew him and respected him. She fell at his feet and said, pardon your servant, my Lord, and Lord is lowercase. She's referring to him as Lord, not the Lord. And let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please. I love 25. This is great. Please pay no attention, my Lord, to that wicked man Nabal. She knew her husband well, didn't she? He is just like his name. His name means fool. And as we learn from Proverbs, folly goes with him everywhere. And as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my Lord sent. And now, my Lord, as surely as the Lord your God, now we get into God, lives and you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming my Lord be like Nabal. And let this gift which your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the men who follow you. What does she do that's so important here?
She bows down and humbles herself.
And prevents him from doing what he intended to do. And that was not. And do you think Abigail, that God had nothing to do with this? Oh, he was right there at all times, right? And it's a good lesson too, because for us, if we put ourselves in David's position, sometimes we get so angry with something or someone, and we, in that anger, we're not going to go out and kill them, but in our anger, we say and do things that we will live to regret. And that's what she helped prevent David from doing. Comments on that?
Well, one thing is that Abigail realized, and all of Israel realized, that David was anointed by Samuel, who represented God,
Yep.
and that he was the rightful heir and king.
Yes.
That Saul is the one that turned against David and pursued him, and he was on the run from Saul.
Exactly.
Now, he had quite a band of men and soldiers. He was able to carry out that duty, but this was an insult to God's anointed, and she realized that. And Nabal should have realized that, but didn't, through his stupidity as a fool, because he didn't think anybody was good. So as he said that, this man here, who is he but a runaway? He was a servant of King Saul, and he ran off. He ran for his life.
Yes. There was a real reason for the running.
And really all Israel understood what was going on. But this wicked Nabal, he didn't understand anything concerning God's will, because like you say, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. He thinks he's the God. He thinks he makes all the decisions. Everything he does is right. We've got a lot of them in our nation today.
Mm-hmm.
They have denied God. They teach against God. And we're having to deal with chaos in our country today because of foolish thinking like that.
That's very true.
You know,
Yes, sir.
and of course, I look at this also from a business perspective. Any business has some loss, shrinkage, the sheep that wandered off, or somebody steals the sheep, and even if you figure maybe 1 or 2% of the stock would disappear, that's probably a lot more than what David was asking for. He said, just give me what you can find. In other words, he lost nothing when he was shearing the sheep. In most cases, he would have lost 2 or 3% of his livestock, which is probably a whole lot more than David was asking for. David wasn't saying, give me half your flock. He said, what have you got? And a businessman would think, well, he saved me 3%. I could split it with you. I mean, it just.
Sure.
But he's not even a good businessman.
No, he's not. And somehow or another, he managed to accumulate quite a bit of wealth.
He might have been a shrewd,
Stab you in the back kind of guy. Yeah, and it's interesting too that you mentioned the sheep, because what did Abigail take? 5 dressed sheep. I mean, good night.
It's not even a percent.
It isn't a percent. It doesn't tip the scale on 3,000 sheep. But anyway, and then she continues, please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord. There's where we know. She knows that everybody knows, because you fight the Lord's battles, and the Lord's there is God. And no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Well, now there might be a few disagreements later on. We're not there yet. So we will just say, okay, But she is basically saying, you made the right decision not to attack. Even though someone pursuing you is to take your life, they know Saul is chasing you. The life of my Lord, that's David, will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God, but the lives of your enemies he will hurl away from the pocket of the sling. And then in verse 30, that when the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have his conscience, on his conscience, the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or having avenged himself. She speaks, when it says she is beautiful and intelligent, she certainly speaks the very opposite of what we saw in Proverbs about what a fool does. She is a very wise woman. And when the Lord your God has brought my Lord success, remember your servant. And David said to Abigail, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. God was at work here, as he always is. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord God of Israel, the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, no one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak. So she certainly came at the right time, to the right place, to the right person to change something very important there. And God's hand is in the whole thing. Then David accepted from her hand what she had brought him and said, go home in peace. I have heard your words and granted your request. Now, we're going to have to speed this up just a little bit. When Abigail got back home, the fool was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was not a king. He was just a wealthy man, but he treats himself as the king. He was in high spirits and very drunk. Or he was very drunk on spirits or something. The high part, he was high on whatever. So he was having a great time. So what did she not do? She didn't tell him anything. This again, I don't think it's the first time this has happened. I think we can infer from this, she knows when he is drunk, when the fool is drunk, he's even worse than just a sober fool. Now that's not in there, it's not in Proverbs either. But I mean, this is what I'm sure this is the thought process she was going through. Now she finally told him at daybreak. In the morning, Nabal was sober. His wife told him all these things, and I'm sure she gave him the detail of everything that had happened. And his heart failed, and he became like a stone. Now, some people will say, well, probably what happened is he had a heart attack. He is now in a coma. He did not turn into a stone, because we're going to see here, a few days later, he dies. And last time I checked, most stones, although I haven't checked all stones, don't usually die. Okay, you can kind of go. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. Now the Lord took him out, and for good reason. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, praise be to the Lord who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head. So you look at the lessons learned from good lessons from a bad guy. The old saying, what goes around will come around. Well, sometimes it does. And when people act as Nabal did, not on that grand a scale, but when they do that, things are going to come down on him. And then David sent word to Abigail. Again, she was a beautiful woman, and we have David. And what did he ask her to come and be his wife? His servants went to Carmel. David has sent her to become your wife. She bowed down. She's quickly got ready and went there because now, of course, Nabal is dead. And I guess one final little footnote lesson there is, his marriage of Abigail was a lot better than his marriage of Bathsheba. He had nothing to do with Nabal's death, but as we kind of hinted at earlier, not really hinted, it was a very heavy-handed hint about David. He did do some things that were wrong, and it was brought to his attention, and he repented from it. Any other comments? We have 3 minutes. Why is it? Well, obviously, they've got a different lesson. I'm gonna have to talk to Dewey about this. But the point, whenever I was teaching at LCU, every time I'd ask for comments, boy, that's the quietest I've come. So any comments? You've had great comments, I appreciate it, and I really, really like to have them. I really do. Now, next week, it's Ananias and Sapphira. All right, we start, it's basically principally in Acts 5, 1 through 11, but in order to make it better, if you read the latter part of Acts chapter 4, you'll see what was going on with the church at the time, before this